In the quiet countryside of Maple Ridge Farm, Hazel Quinn arrives with nothing but a duffel bag and broken dreams. When she meets the stoic farmer Reed Callan, neither expects how a struggling newborn calf will change their lives. Their journey of healing, sacrifice, and second chances proves that sometimes the most beautiful beginnings come from broken pieces. Before we begin this story, comment below where you're watching from. The morning sun cast long shadows across Maple Ridge Farm as Hazel Quinn stepped off the bus at the end of the dusty country road. At 26, she had little to show for her years except a borrowed duffel bag, worn-out boots, and a handwritten note from her college roommate, Jenny. "The farmer needs help," Jenny had written, "and he has a good heart under all the quiet. Maybe you'll find what you're looking for there." Hazel wasn't sure what she was looking for anymore. 6 months ago, she'd had it all planned out: a job at a veterinary clinic in the city, an apartment with her boyfriend of 3 years, and dreams of eventually opening her own animal sanctuary. Then, without warning, she'd come home to find him gone, along with half their belongings and all their shared savings. No explanation, just an empty apartment and a note that said, "I need more than this." More than her, he'd meant. Hazel adjusted her bag on her shoulder and started the half-mile walk up to the farmhouse. The property was larger than she'd expected, with fields stretching in every direction. The barn needed a fresh coat of paint, and the fences had seen better days, but there was something peaceful about the place. As she approached the house, she noticed a tall figure standing on the porch, arms crossed over his chest. Reed Callan was exactly as Jenny had described him, intimidating at first glance, with broad shoulders, dark hair, and eyes that seemed to see right through you. "You must be Hazel," he said, his voice deep but not unfriendly. She nodded, suddenly nervous. "Yes, Jenny told me you needed help." Reed studied her for a long moment. "You have experience with farm work?" "Not exactly," Hazel admitted, "but I worked at an animal shelter for 2 years during college, and I'm not afraid of hard work." Reed seemed to consider this, his expression giving nothing away. Finally, he gestured toward the barn. "We have a newborn that won't nurse. You can prove yourself there." Without waiting for her response, he turned and headed toward the barn. Hazel quickly followed, leaving her bag on the porch. Inside the barn, the air was warm and filled with the familiar smells of hay and animals. Reed led her to a small stall where a black and white calf lay on its side, barely moving. "Born 2 days ago," Reed explained, his voice softer now. "Mother died during the birth. Won't take a bottle. Vet says if he doesn't eat by morning, there's not much hope." Hazel's heart squeezed at the sight of the tiny creature. She knelt beside the calf, running her hand gently along its side. Its breathing was shallow, its eyes dull. "Has he been given any medication?" she asked. "Everything the vet recommended." Hazel nodded, thinking. "Do you have any milk replacer?" Reed left and returned with a bottle of formula. Hazel took it, then asked for a warm, damp cloth. When Reed brought it, she began to gently wipe the calf's face and neck, mimicking how a mother cow would lick her newborn. "Hey there, little one," she whispered. "I know you're tired, I know you miss your mama, but we're going to take care of you now." Reed watched from the doorway as Hazel continued talking softly to the calf, stroking its head and neck. After about 20 minutes, she carefully positioned herself and tried the bottle again, guiding the nipple to the calf's mouth. At first, nothing happened. Then, almost imperceptibly, the calf's lips moved. A weak suckle, then another. "That's it," Hazel encouraged. "Just a little more." By the time the sun had set, the calf had taken nearly half the bottle. It wasn't much, but it was something. "I'll stay with him tonight," Hazel said, looking up at Reed. Reed's expression had changed. The hardness in his eyes had softened just a fraction. "There's a cot in the tack room. I'll show you where everything is." After Reed had gone back to the house, Hazel made a small bed of blankets next to the calf's stall. Throughout the night, she woke every couple of hours to offer the bottle, and each time the calf took a little more. When dawn broke, Hazel was awakened by a nudge against her hand. The calf had managed to stand on wobbly legs and was looking at her expectantly. "Well, good morning to you too," she said with a tired smile. The barn door opened and Reed appeared with 2 steaming mugs. He stopped short when he saw the calf standing. "He's up," Reed said, his voice betraying a hint of surprise. Hazel nodded, accepting the mug he offered. He drank most of a bottle around 4 a.m. I think he's going to be okay. Reed watched as the calf took a few unsteady steps toward Hazel. Something flickered across his face. Relief, Hazel thought at first. But there was something more. Something that looked almost like hope. "You can stay," Reed said simply. "I have a small apartment above the garage. It's not much, but it's yours if you want the job." "Thank you," Hazel replied. "I'd like that." Over the next few weeks, Hazel fell into the rhythm of farm life. She woke before sunrise, helped with morning chores, then spent most days working alongside Reed or tending to the animals. The calf, whom she'd named Lucky, grew stronger each day, following Hazel around like a puppy whenever she was in the barn. Reed remained quiet most of the time, but Hazel noticed he was always watching. When she figured out a better system for the chicken coop, he nodded in approval. When she planted herbs along the kitchen window, she caught him looking at them with something like appreciation in his eyes. One evening, as a summer storm rolled in, Hazel was rushing to gather the laundry from the clothesline when Reed appeared beside her, silently helping to fold sheets before the rain hit. "Thanks," she said as they hurried toward the house, arms full of clean linens. Reed nodded, holding the door open for her. Just as they made it inside, the sky opened up. Rain pounded against the roof, and a flash of lightning was quickly followed by a crash of thunder that made Hazel jump. Then the lights went out. "Hold on," Reed said, his voice coming from somewhere in the darkness. "I've got candles in the kitchen." Hazel waited, listening to him move around with the confidence of someone who knew every inch of their home. A match struck, and warm light filled the kitchen as Reed lit several candles. "Happens all the time out here," he explained, setting a candle in front of her. "Power company says we're at the end of the line." Hazel smiled. "It's nice, actually. Reminds me of camping with my dad when I was little." Something in Reed's expression changed at the mention of family. "You have a big family?" he asked, the question surprising her after weeks of him barely speaking. "Not anymore," Hazel said softly. "My parents divorced when I was 12. Mom remarried and moved to Arizona. Dad passed away my senior year of high school." She hesitated, then added, "It's been just me for a while now." Reed nodded as if confirming something to himself. "How about you?" Hazel asked. "Any family nearby?" Reed was quiet for so long that Hazel thought he wasn't going to answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was low. "Had a brother, Jason. He died the night Lucky was born." The simple statement hung in the air between them, heavy with unspoken grief. "I'm so sorry," Hazel said gently. Reed looked away, focusing on the candle flame. "Car accident. He was on his way here to help with the carving." His jaw tightened. "We were the only family each other had left. Parents gone 5 years now." Hazel fought the urge to reach for his hand. Instead, she asked, "Is that why Lucky means so much to you?" Reed's eyes met hers, surprised that she had made the connection. When that calf wouldn't eat, it felt like... He trailed off, struggling to find the words. "Like one more thing was being taken away," Hazel finished for him. Reed nodded, a flash of understanding passing between them. A particularly loud crack of thunder made them both jump, breaking the moment. Then, unexpectedly, Reed laughed, a short, rusty sound, as if he hadn't used it in a long time. "Going to be a long night," he said, nodding toward the window where rain lashed against the glass. "Might as well make some coffee." They spent the next hour sitting at the kitchen table, the storm raging outside while they talked more than they had in all the weeks since Hazel's arrival. Reed asked about her life before Maple Ridge, and Hazel found herself telling him about her ex-boyfriend's disappearing act, surprised at how the pain had dulled to a distant ache. "His loss," Reed said simply when she finished her story, and the matter-of-fact way he said it made Hazel smile. When the lights finally came back on, around midnight, Hazel was almost disappointed. The candlelight had created a bubble around them, a space where Reed's guarded exterior had softened just enough to let her see the person underneath. As she headed to her apartment above the garage, Hazel realized something had shifted between them. There was a new ease, a sense of understanding that hadn't been there before, and later, lying in bed listening to the storm fade into the distance, Hazel thought about the way Reed's fingers had brushed against hers when he handed her a coffee mug. How neither of them had pulled away. How his eyes had lingered on her face in the candlelight. She hadn't come to Maple Ridge looking for anything more than a fresh start. A place to heal and find her footing again. Romance was the last thing on her mind, but as she drifted off to sleep, Hazel couldn't help wondering if maybe, just maybe, she'd found something she wasn't looking for, something that might give her a reason to stay. As summer turned to fall, Maple Ridge Farm slowly came back to life under Hazel's care. The vegetable garden she'd planted behind the kitchen now overflowed with tomatoes and squash. The chicken coop had been repaired, with fresh eggs collected each morning. Even the old farmhouse felt warmer somehow, with curtains Hazel had found at a thrift store and wildflowers arranged in mason jars on the kitchen table. Lucky, no longer the fragile newborn calf, had grown into a healthy young bull who still followed Hazel around the barnyard. His rescue had earned Hazel a reputation in the community as someone with a special touch for animals, and neighboring farmers occasionally called for her help with their livestock. Reed had changed too. The hard lines around his mouth had softened, and sometimes Hazel would catch him watching her with an expression she couldn't quite name. He spoke more often now, especially during their shared dinners in the farmhouse kitchen. They had fallen into a comfortable routine, Reed handling the heavy farm work, while Hazel managed the animals and kept things running smoothly around the house. One crisp October morning, Hazel was in the barn, checking on a pregnant mare when Reed appeared in the doorway. "Need to head into town for supplies," he said. "Thought you might want to come along," Hazel smiled. "I'd like that. Give me 10 minutes to finish up here." The drive into town was peaceful, with the countryside painted in autumn colors. Reed's truck rumbled along the country roads as Hazel rolled down her window to enjoy the fresh air. "Beautiful out here," she commented. Reed nodded. "Jason and I used to race our bikes along this road when we were kids." A small smile played at his lips. He always won. Hazel recognized the gift in these small stories about his brother. Reed rarely spoke about Jason, but lately he'd begun sharing memories, brief glimpses into the life they'd shared. "He sounds like he was a good brother," Hazel said gently. "The best," Reed agreed. "Smart too, college degree in business. He handled all the farm finances, paperwork." His hands tightened on the steering wheel. "I'm still figuring it all out." At the farm supply store, they loaded up on feed, hardware for fence repairs and medicine for the animals. The store owner, a gray-haired man named Joe, greeted them warmly. "Good to see you out and about, Reed," Joe said, ringing up their purchases. "And nice to see you again, Hazel. Heard you saved the miller's prize sow last week." Hazel shrugged. "Just remembered something I'd read about treating infections. Modest, this one," Joe said to Reed with a wink. "You'd better keep her around." Reed didn't respond, but Hazel noticed the tips of his ears turn red. As they were loading the last of their supplies into the truck, a sleek black car pulled up beside them. A man in an expensive suit stepped out, his polished shoes looking out of place on the gravel parking lot. "Reed Callan," the man called out. "Thought that was you." Reed's posture stiffened. "Mr. Daniels. Got a minute?" the man asked, glancing at Hazel with curiosity. "This is Hazel Quinn," Reed said. "She works at the farm. Hazel, this is Edward Daniels from First National Bank." "Nice to meet you," Hazel said, noting the sudden tension in Reed's shoulders. "Likewise," Daniels replied with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Reed, about our discussion last month." "Not now," Reed cut him off. "I'll come by the bank next week." Daniels raised an eyebrow. "Time's running out, Reed. Can't keep pushing this down the road." "I said not now," Reed repeated, his voice low but firm. The banker shrugged. "Suit yourself, but my offer still stands." Much easier than the alternative. He nodded to Hazel and walked back to his car. The drive back to the farm was silent, with Reed staring straight ahead, his jaw clenched. Hazel waited, sensing that whatever had happened in town had shaken him. Finally, as they turned onto the long driveway leading to the farm, she asked, "Everything okay with the bank?" Reed's hands tightened on the wheel. "Fine." Didn't seem fine. Reed sighed, pulling the truck to a stop in front of the barn. "It's nothing for you to worry about." "If it affects the farm, then it affects me too," Hazel pointed out. For a moment, she thought he might open up, but instead he shook his head. I'll handle it. That evening, Hazel made dinner as usual, but Reed ate quickly and then disappeared outside. Through the kitchen window, she could see him sitting on the old wooden swing that hung from the big oak tree, staring out at the fields as darkness fell. Hazel finished washing the dishes, then grabbed a blanket from the living room and headed outside. Without a word, she sat beside Reed on the swing and draped the blanket over both their shoulders against the chill of the evening. For a long time, they just sat there, the creaking of the swing the only sound between them. "My father built this swing for my mother when they first bought this place," Reed finally said. "Used to find them out here after dinner, just sitting and talking." Hazel smiled, picturing it. "Sounds nice." It was. They worked hard, but they were happy. Reed looked out at the darkened fields. "Everything I know about farming, I learned from my dad. But Jason was the one who understood the business side. He had plans to modernize, expand operations." "And now it's all on you," Hazel said softly. Reed nodded. "Farm's been in the family for 3 generations. Dad always said land was the only investment that lasts." He paused. "But land needs money to keep it going. Bad harvest last year, equipment breaking down. And then Jason..." His voice trailed off, but Hazel understood. Jason's death had been not only an emotional blow, but a practical one as well. "The bank wants their money," Reed continued. "Loans past due. Daniels keeps making offers to buy the property. Says he has developers interested." Hazel felt a pang in her chest at the thought of Maple Ridge turned into tract housing or a shopping center. "Is there no other way?" Reed shrugged. "Been trying to figure that out for months. Got a little more time, but not much." Without thinking, Hazel reached for his hand. His skin was rough with calluses, warm against her fingers. "We'll figure something out." Reed looked down at their joined hands, then up at her face. In the moonlight, his eyes were dark and serious. "Why did you stay, Hazel? Could have found easier work somewhere else." The question caught her off guard. She'd asked herself the same thing many times over the past months. "At first I just needed somewhere to go," she admitted. But then she hesitated, searching for the right words. "This place got under my skin, the farm, the animals." "And me?" Reed asked quietly. Hazel's heart beat faster. "Yes. And you." The moment stretched between them, full of unspoken feelings. Then slowly Reed leaned forward. His lips met hers in a gentle kiss that made Hazel's breath catch. His hand came up to touch her cheek, calloused fingers surprisingly tender against her skin. When they pulled apart, Reed rested his forehead against hers. "Been wanting to do that for a while now." Hazel smiled. "Why didn't you?" "Wasn't sure you felt the same. Wasn't sure I had the right to start something when everything else is so uncertain." Hazel squeezed his hand. "Life's always uncertain. Doesn't mean we stop living it." They stayed on the swing until the night grew cold, talking about small things and big things, making plans for the farm, sharing hopes that neither had dared voice before. When they finally walked back to the house, hand in hand, Hazel felt a certainty she hadn't experienced in a long time. This was where she belonged. The next morning, Hazel was in the kitchen making coffee when she heard Reed's truck start up. Looking out the window, she watched him drive away, surprised he hadn't mentioned going anywhere. Usually they discussed the day's work over breakfast. Shrugging it off, she went about her morning chores. By noon, Reed still hadn't returned, but Hazel wasn't worried. Sometimes he made deliveries to other farms or had to pick up parts for equipment. It was late afternoon when she noticed the envelope on the desk in the small office off the kitchen. It had her name on it, written in Reed's neat handwriting. Beside it lay a stack of papers she hadn't seen before. Curious, Hazel picked up the envelope, but something made her look at the papers first. They were bank statements, loan documents, and finally a notice of foreclosure. The words jumped out at her. Final notice and payment due, foreclosure proceedings. The date on the notice was just 2 weeks away. With shaking hands, Hazel opened the envelope. "Hazel," Reed had written. "Gone to meet with the bank. Wanted to tell you about the farm's troubles, but couldn't find the words. Didn't want to burden you with my problems. You've brought light back to this place, and to me. Whatever happens. With the farm, I need you to know that. Be back by evening. Reed." Hazel sat down heavily in the desk chair, the papers spread out before her. The situation was worse than she'd imagined. The farm was deeply in debt, with payments missed long before she'd arrived. Reed had been fighting a losing battle all this time, and she'd had no idea. Her eyes caught on another document, a purchase offer from Daniels. The amount was substantial, enough to pay off the debts and leave Reed with a decent sum. But it would mean selling the farm, giving up everything his family had built. For hours, Hazel sat at the desk reading through every document, trying to understand the full picture. As the sun began to set, an idea started to form in her mind. It was a long shot, but maybe, just maybe, there was a way to save Maple Ridge. She was still working on her plan when she heard the sound of tires on gravel. Gathering up the papers, she headed outside just as Reed was stepping out of his truck. One look at his face told her everything. "They won't extend the loan," she said. It wasn't a question. Reed's tired eyes met hers. "You found the papers. Why didn't you tell me how bad things were?" Reed ran a hand through his hair. "Didn't want you worrying, didn't want you feeling like you had to stay because of my problems." "I'm staying because I want to," Hazel said firmly. "This is my home now too." Something flickered in Reed's eyes. Hope, quickly replaced by resignation. "May not be a home much longer. Bank's given me till the end of the month, then they start foreclosure." "Unless you sell to Daniels," Hazel said. Reed nodded. "He was at the bank today, raised his offer." He looked out at the fields golden in the setting sun. "My great-grandfather bought this land when there was nothing here but dirt and dreams, built it up acre by acre. My grandfather expanded it, my father modernized it, and I'm the one who's going to lose it all." The defeat in his voice broke Hazel's heart. "There has to be another way." Reed shook his head. "Been over it 100 times, can't get another loan. Can't sell off part of the property. Daniels wants it all or nothing for his development." He sighed heavily. "Only other option would be to sell off the livestock equipment, start smaller, try to rebuild." "The livestock?" Hazel repeated, a sinking feeling in her stomach. "Yeah, but even that wouldn't be enough, and without proper equipment we couldn't run the farm anyway." He looked at her, his expression softening. "I'm sorry, Hazel. I wanted to give you something stable, a place to belong." "We'll figure this out," Hazel insisted. "Together." That night, they sat at the kitchen table long after dinner was finished, going through the farm's finances again. Reed explained everything. The loans his father had taken out to modernize the equipment, the failed investment Jason had made in a new irrigation system, the bad harvest that had left them unable to meet the mortgage payments. "What about the bull?" Hazel asked suddenly. Reed looked confused. "Lucky?" "No, your prize bull, the one you keep in the north pasture." "Thunderbolt? What about him?" "You've had offers for him, right? I remember you turning down that breeder from Kentucky last month." Reed nodded slowly. "He's valuable, championship bloodlines, but selling him would only buy us a little time." "What about his calves?" Hazel pressed. "The ones due in the spring. They'd fetch a good price too, especially from his new pairing with that Angus heifer, but not enough to save the farm." Hazel bit her lip, thinking. "Maybe not. But what if we could buy enough time to implement a new plan, something Jason was working on?" Reed stared at her. "What are you talking about?" "I found some notes in the office, plans for a small dairy operation, nothing huge, but something to diversify, create steady income." Hazel's eyes were bright with excitement. "It could work, Reed. We'd need to start small, but with your knowledge of cattle and my background in animal care." For the first time that day, a glimmer of hope appeared in Reed's eyes. "It would take money we don't have. But we might if we sell Thunderbolt and use that money to negotiate with the bank, buy some time, start the dairy project." Hazel reached across the table to take his hand. "It's worth a try, isn't it?" Reed looked at her for a long moment, then nodded. "It's worth a try." The next morning, Reed made some calls. The breeder in Kentucky was still interested in Thunderbolt, and the price he offered was even higher than before. It wasn't enough to pay off the bank entirely, but it might be enough to convince them to restructure the loan. As Reed hung up the phone, he turned to Hazel with a determined expression. "If this works, when this works," Hazel corrected him with a smile. "When this works," Reed agreed, pulling her into his arms. "It's going to mean starting over, building something new. It won't be easy. Hazel wrapped her arms around his waist, looking up at him. Nothing worth having ever is. Reed's eyes were serious as he looked down at her. You brought that calf back to life, but you brought me back too. If I lose this place, I'll survive. But if I lose you, I don't know if I will. The honesty in his words took Hazel's breath away. For someone who had lost so much, the courage to love again was no small thing. You won't lose me, she promised. Whatever happens, we'll face it together. Reed leaned down to kiss her, sealing their promise with a tenderness that spoke more than words ever could. But even as Hazel returned his kiss, a small voice in the back of her mind whispered a warning. What if their plan failed? What if the bank refused to negotiate? What if selling Thunderbolt meant losing Lucky too, the calf that had brought them together? Some sacrifices were too high, even for love, and Hazel wasn't sure if Reed was ready to make that choice. The next few days passed in a whirlwind of activity as Reed and Hazel put their plan into action. Reed contacted the Kentucky breeder, who agreed to come see Thunderbolt at the end of the week. Meanwhile, Hazel dug deeper into Jason's notes about the dairy operation, making lists of what they would need and how much it would cost. Jason had it all figured out, Hazel said, spreading the papers on the kitchen table. Start with 10 dairy cows, use the old barn on the east side of the property, sell milk to local stores and restaurants. Reed nodded, studying the numbers. My brother was always the planner, said diversifying was the only way small farms survive these days. He was right, Hazel agreed, and we're going to make his plan work. On Thursday, they drove together to the bank to meet with Edward Daniels. The banker's smile faded when Reed explained their proposal, selling Thunderbolt to make a large payment on the loan, then restructuring the remaining debt to give them time to start the dairy business. It's not enough, Daniels said, tapping his pen against the desk. The bull would cover maybe a quarter of what you owe. And the dairy plan, that's a big risk. No guarantee it would work. No business is guaranteed, Hazel pointed out. But the numbers make sense. We've done the research. Daniels looked at her with mild surprise, as if noticing her for the first time. You seem invested in this farm, Miss Quinn. May I ask why? You've only been there a few months from what I understand. Before Hazel could answer, Reed spoke up. Hazel's part of Maple Ridge now. Her future is tied to the farm's future. The certainty in his voice made Hazel's heart swell. Under the table, she reached for his hand. Daniels leaned back in his chair. I'll be honest with you both. The bank isn't interested in taking over a struggling farm. It's a headache we don't need, but my clients are very interested in that land. For development, he slid a folder across the desk. This is their latest offer. Take a look. Reed opened the folder, and Hazel leaned in to see. The amount was even higher than before, enough to pay off all debts and leave a substantial sum. You could start fresh, Daniels continued. Buy a smaller place, maybe even start that dairy business somewhere else. No debt hanging over your head. Reed closed the folder without comment. We'd like a week to consider our options. The foreclosure is set for the end of the month, Daniels reminded them. This offer expires next Friday. As they walked to the truck, Hazel could sense the weight of the decision on Reed's shoulders. We don't have to decide anything today, she said gently. Reed nodded but remained quiet on the drive home. That evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, he finally spoke. Been thinking about what Daniels said, about starting fresh, somewhere else. Hazel felt a cold knot form in her stomach. You're considering selling, Reed sighed, running a hand through his hair. Just wondering if I'm being selfish, fighting to keep this place when it might be smarter to let it go. He looked at her. You deserve better than a struggling farm and a man drowning in debt. That's not for you to decide, Hazel said firmly. I choose where I want to be and who I want to be with. And if the dairy plan fails, if we lose everything anyway, then we'll figure something else out. Hazel took his hand. This land isn't just property, Reed, it's your heritage. It's where your parents and grandparents built their lives. It's where Jason's memory lives. Reed's eyes softened. And it's where I found you. Yes, Hazel said with a small smile. That too. The next morning, the Kentucky breeder arrived to look at Thunderbolt. He was impressed with the bull, offering even more than they'd hoped. The deal was set. He would return on Monday with the payment and arranged transportation. That's one piece of the puzzle, Reed said as they watched the breeder's truck disappear down the driveway. Now we need to convince the bank to work with us on the rest. They spent the weekend going over their plans for the dairy operation, refining the numbers and preparing their proposal for the bank. It was late Sunday evening when Hazel realized she hadn't seen Lucky all day. He's usually hanging around the barn by feeding time, she said with a frown. Did you see him earlier? Reed shook his head. Not since morning. Let's check the pastures. As darkness fell, they searched the farm, calling for the young bull. Finally, in the far corner of the north pasture, they found him lying on his side, breathing heavily. Something's wrong, Hazel said, kneeling beside him. She ran her hands over his body, checking for injuries. When she reached his abdomen, Lucky let out a painful moo. He's bloated. Might have eaten something toxic. Reed was already on his phone, calling the vet. Dr. Miller says he can be here in 30 minutes. Says to keep Lucky calm and upright if we can get him up. Together, they managed to help the young bull to his feet. Hazel talked to him softly, stroking his neck the way she had done when he was a newborn. You'll be okay, she promised. We've got you. The vet arrived and quickly diagnosed the problem. Lucky had indeed eaten something toxic, possibly from a plant that had grown in the pasture. The treatment was straightforward, but would require close monitoring overnight. I'll stay with him, Hazel insisted as the vet packed up his supplies. Reed nodded. I'll bring you some coffee and blankets. It's going to be a long night. As Hazel settled in beside Lucky in the barn, something caught her eye. A notice tacked to the bulletin board she hadn't seen before. It was an announcement for a regional livestock competition to be held next weekend. The grand prize was substantial, not enough to save the farm, but enough to make a difference. Reed, she called when he returned with coffee. What's this? Reed glanced at the notice. Annual competition. Dad used to enter our cattle every year, won a few times too. Could we enter Lucky? Hazel asked. Once he's better, of course. Reed looked doubtful. He's not a show bull, Hazel. Those competitions favor purebreds with championship bloodlines. Lucky's mother was a mixed breed. But he's strong and healthy, or will be after he recovers, and he has a special quality about him. Hazel's mind was racing with possibilities. What if it's not just about winning? What if we could use the competition to showcase what we're doing here? Make connections for the dairy business? Reed considered this. It could be a networking opportunity. A lot of farmers and breeders attend those events. Exactly, Hazel said excitedly. And if we did win, that would be a bonus. For the first time in days, Reed smiled, a real smile that reached his eyes. You never give up, do you? Hazel shrugged. Not when something matters. The next morning, Lucky was much improved. The vet gave him a clean bill of health but recommended keeping him in the barn for a few days. Hazel was relieved, not just for Lucky's sake, but because she had come to realize how important he was to Reed, a living symbol of hope and new beginnings. Later that day, the Kentucky breeder arrived as scheduled to finalize the sale of Thunderbolt. As they walked to the north pasture where the prize bull was kept, Reed was unusually quiet. Everything okay? Hazel asked. Reed nodded, but his eyes were troubled. Just saying goodbye to a champion. Dad bred Thunderbolt's line for 20 years. The breeder was effusive in his praise as they approached the magnificent bull. He's going to improve our breeding program tremendously, he said, handing Reed a check. Money well spent. As they watched Thunderbolt being loaded into the trailer, Hazel slipped her hand into Reed's. His calves will be born in the spring, she reminded him. His legacy stays here. Reed squeezed her hand. And we'll use this money to build something new, for the future. With Thunderbolt's sale finalized, they drove straight to the bank. This time, Edward Daniels listened more attentively to their proposal. The payment from the bull's sale, combined with their detailed plan for the dairy operation, seemed to make an impression. I'll need to discuss this with the loan committee, Daniels said cautiously. But you've made a good case for restructuring the debt. And the foreclosure? Reed asked. On hold for now, Daniels replied. I'll have an answer for you by the end of the week. As they drove back to the farm, Hazel could sense Reed's relief. "We're not out of the woods yet," she cautioned, "but it's a start." "It's more than that," Reed said, reaching for her hand. "It's a second chance, for the farm and for us." The next few days were a flurry of activity as they prepared for the livestock competition while waiting to hear from the bank. Reed decided to enter not only Lucky, but 2 other young bulls as well. Hazel worked with them daily, grooming and training, surprised at how quickly Lucky learned what was expected of him. "He's a natural," she told Reed as they watched Lucky prance around the practice ring they'd set up. "The judges will love him." Reed smiled. "They'll love seeing you with him, the way you two connected from the beginning. It's special." The night before the competition, Reed found Hazel in the barn giving Lucky one final grooming. "Got a minute?" he asked. "Sure," Hazel said, putting down the brush. "Everything okay?" Reed took her hand and led her outside. The full moon cast a silver light over the farm, making it look almost magical. "Wanted to show you something," Reed said, guiding her toward a small building near the old apple orchard. It was the dairy barn Jason had mentioned in his notes, unused for years. Reed pushed open the door and flipped a switch. Lights came on, revealing a space that had been completely cleaned and partially renovated. New stalls lined one wall, and a small milk processing area was taking shape in the corner. "Reed," Hazel gasped, "when did you do all this?" "Been working on it in the evenings," he admitted. "Wanted to surprise you, show you that I believe in our plan, in our future." Hazel took in the sight, emotion welling up in her throat. "It's perfect." Reed turned to face her, taking both her hands in his. "Whether we win tomorrow or not, whether the bank gives us more time or not, I need you to know something." His eyes were serious in the dim light. "I love you, Hazel. You came here with nothing but a duffel bag and saved everything that matters to me. The farm lucky me?" Hazel felt tears spring to her eyes. After being left behind so carelessly by her ex-boyfriend, hearing these words from Reed, solid, dependable Reed, meant everything. "I love you too," she whispered. "And whatever happens, we'll face it together." Reed pulled her close, his kiss a promise that didn't need words. The morning of the competition dawned bright and clear. They loaded Lucky and the other bulls into the trailer and headed for the fairgrounds. The place was bustling with activity. Farmers, ranchers and breeders from across the region had brought their best livestock to show. As they settled their animals into the assigned stalls, Hazel noticed Reed scanning the crowd, his expression tense. "Looking for someone?" she asked. "Just getting a feel for the competition," he replied, but something in his voice made Hazel wonder if there was more to it. The judging began in the early afternoon. Reed's bulls performed well in their categories, earning respectable scores, but not placing in the top 3. Lucky was scheduled to be shown last. As Hazel prepared to lead him into the ring, Reed put a hand on her arm. "Whatever happens in there, I'm proud of what we've done." Hazel nodded, understanding that he meant not just with Lucky, but with everything. The farm, their plans for the future, the life they were building together. The judging for Lucky's category was intense. The young bull performed beautifully, responding to Hazel's subtle cues, as if they had been working together for years instead of months. When the judges asked her about his breeding and care, Hazel spoke passionately about Maple Ridge Farm and their vision for its future. As they waited for the results, Hazel caught sight of a familiar face in the crowd. Edward Daniels, the banker, was standing at the edge of the ring, watching with interest. The announcer called for attention. "In the category of young mixed breed bulls, 3rd place goes to Big Sky Ranch." Hazel held her breath, her hand on Lucky's halter. "2nd place to Green Valley Farms." Reed moved closer, his arm sliding around her waist. "And 1st place, with a score that impressed all our judges, goes to Lucky from Maple Ridge Farm, shown by Hazel Quinn." For a moment Hazel couldn't move. Then Lucky nudged her forward as if knowing they needed to accept the award. The crowd applauded as a blue ribbon was pinned to Lucky's halter and a trophy was presented to Hazel. "Congratulations," the head judge said, shaking her hand. "That's a special animal you've got there and an impressive young woman showing him." As they left the ring, Reed swept Hazel into a hug, lifting her off her feet. "You did it. I knew." "You could," Hazel laughed, her heart full. "We did it, you, me, and Lucky." Edward Daniels approached them, his expression unreadable. "Impressive showing," he said. "The loan committee met this morning." Reed tensed beside her. "And?" "And they've decided to approve your restructuring plan," Daniels said. "The payment from the bull sale, combined with what I've seen here today, convinced them you're making the right changes to make the farm profitable again." Relief washed over Hazel. "Thank you," Daniels nodded. "I'll have the paperwork ready on Monday. And Callan," he extended his hand to Reed, "your brother would be proud of what you're doing with the place." As they drove home that evening, the trophy on the seat between them and Lucky safely in the trailer, Hazel felt a peace she hadn't known in a long time. The farm was safe. Their future together was secure. Everything was falling into place. But as they turned onto the long driveway leading to Maple Ridge, Reed's phone rang. His face grew serious as he listened to the caller. "What is it?" Hazel asked when he hung up. "That was Joe from the farm supply store," Reed said, his voice tight. "He heard from a friend who works for Daniels. The loan restructuring. There's a condition they didn't mention today." Hazel frowned. "What kind of condition?" Reed's hands tightened on the steering wheel. "They want collateral, something valuable enough to cover their risk. But we've already sold Thunderbolt," Hazel said. "What else could they want?" Reed pulled the truck to a stop in front of the barn and turned to look at her, his expression grim. "Lucky," he said quietly. "They want Lucky." "Lucky?" Hazel's voice was barely a whisper. "But why?" Reed rubbed his face, exhaustion evident in every line of his body. "Prize-winning bull now, worth a lot more after today's competition. They figure if we default on the loan, they'll at least have something valuable to show for it." Hazel looked toward the trailer, where Lucky waited to be unloaded. The young bull who had started it all, who had brought them together, was now being demanded as payment for their future. "There has to be another way," she said. "What about the other cattle?" Reed shook his head. "Not worth as much." Daniels was specific. "He wants Lucky as collateral." "But he's more than just an animal to us," Hazel protested. "He's part of this place, part of our story." Reed's eyes met hers, filled with regret. "I know, but without the loan restructuring, we lose the farm. Everything." Hazel felt torn in two. The logical part of her understood the bank's position. Lucky was an asset, valuable collateral, but her heart rebelled at the thought of risking him. "What if we default?" she asked quietly. "What happens to Lucky then?" "They sell him to cover the debt," Reed answered. "Probably to a breeder who'll use him for stud, or—" He broke off, unable to voice the alternative. "Or to slaughter," Hazel finished for him. The thought made her stomach turn. They unloaded Lucky into his stall in silence, both lost in their own thoughts. The blue ribbon from the competition hung from a nail nearby, a bittersweet reminder of their victory. "We have the weekend to decide," Reed finally said as they walked toward the house. "Paperwork's ready on Monday." That night Hazel couldn't sleep. She tossed and turned, her mind racing with possible solutions. None seemed viable. Selling other livestock wouldn't raise enough money. Taking out a personal loan was impossible, with Reed's credit already damaged by the farm's financial troubles. In the early hours of the morning, she made a decision. Slipping out of bed, she wrote a note and left it on the kitchen table. Then she packed a small bag, took her car keys, and headed to the barn. The sun was just beginning to lighten the eastern sky as she entered Lucky's stall. The young bull greeted her with a gentle nudge, his dark eyes trusting. "Hey, buddy," she whispered, stroking his neck. "I need you to understand something." She knelt beside him, the way she had that first night, and spoke softly about love and sacrifice, about making hard choices for those you care about. Lucky listened, as he always did, his warm breath on her cheek. When she was done, she placed the note she'd written in the stall, tucking it securely where Reed would find it. Then, with a final pat to Lucky's side, she slipped out of the barn and into her car. As she drove down the long driveway, tears blurred her vision, but she was certain of her decision. Reed needed time to choose what mattered most without her influence. And she needed space to accept whatever choice he made. The note she'd left read simply, "You taught me that broken things can still grow, but even roots need something to hold on to. I'm not running away this time, just giving you space to decide. What matters most? I'll be at Jenny's for a few days. Whatever you choose, know that I love you." Reed found the note later that morning when he went to feed the animals. At first, panic seized him. Hazel was gone. But as he read her words, he understood. This wasn't like her ex disappearing without explanation. This was Hazel giving him the freedom to make the hardest decision of his life. For 3 days, Reed worked the farm alone, thinking through every possible option. He called the bank, trying to negotiate different terms, but Daniels was firm. Lucky, or no deal. He spoke with other farmers looking for advice or alternative financing, but found no solutions. On the third night, Reed sat on the front porch, watching the stars appear in the darkening sky. The farm stretched out before him, bathed in moonlight. The fields his great-grandfather had plowed, the barn his grandfather had built, the house where generations of Callans had lived and loved and died. And then there was Lucky, the calf who had refused to die, who had brought Hazel into his life, the symbol of everything they had built together. Reed had never been a man of many words, had never found it easy to express his feelings. But that night, alone under the stars, he finally understood what mattered most. The next morning, he rose before dawn and drove to Jenny's house in town. When Hazel opened the door, her eyes wary but hopeful, Reed simply held out his hand. "Come home," he said. "I've made my decision." The drive back to Maple Ridge was quiet, both of them nervous about what lay ahead. When they turned onto the familiar driveway, Hazel finally spoke. "Whatever you've decided, Reed, I'll support you. If we have to start over somewhere else, we will." Reed reached for her hand. "That's just it, Hazel. I realized something these past few days. Home isn't just this land or these buildings. It's where we're together. You and me." He parked the truck in front of the barn and led her inside. Lucky greeted them with an eager moo, and Hazel rushed to his stall, wrapping her arms around the bull's sturdy neck. "I've missed you," she whispered. Reed watched them, his heart full. "I called Daniels this morning, told him we need different terms." Hazel turned to face him. "What did he say?" "He wasn't happy, but I offered him something else as collateral." Reed took a deep breath. "The East Field, the one by the old orchard." Hazel's eyes widened. "But that's where you wanted to expand the dairy operation." Reed nodded. "We'll have to start smaller. Use the old barn for now, renovate it bit by bit. It'll take longer, but we'll get there." He moved closer, taking her hands in his. "The important thing is that we'll be doing it together, with Lucky, right here where he belongs." Tears filled Hazel's eyes. "You chose us." "Always will," Reed said simply. 3 months later, Maple Ridge Farm was beginning to transform. The loan had been restructured with the East Field as collateral, giving them breathing room to start the dairy business. The old barn was now home to 6 dairy cows, with plans to add more in the spring. Lucky, still sporting his blue ribbon from the competition, had become something of a local celebrity. Reed had received several offers from breeders wanting to use him for stud services, a new source of income they hadn't anticipated. On a crisp winter evening, Reed and Hazel sat on the porch swing, wrapped in a blanket against the cold. The first snow of the season was beginning to fall, dusting the farm in white. "Got a call from Sarah Miller today," Reed said. "She wants to bring her kindergarten class for a tour next week. Says they're studying where milk comes from." Hazel smiled. "That's a great idea. We could show them the milking process, let them pet the calves. Maybe start doing regular tours," Reed suggested. "Educational visits, another way to diversify." "I love it," Hazel agreed. "And I was thinking about what Jason wrote about selling, directly to restaurants. I talked to that new farm-to-table place in town yesterday. The chef is interested in local dairy products." Reed nodded, his arm tightening around her shoulders. "One step at a time, but we're getting there." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the snow fall. Reed's free hand reached into his pocket, fingers closing around the small box he'd been carrying for days, waiting for the right moment. "Been thinking," he said finally, "about roots and growing, and how sometimes the best things in life come from the most unexpected beginnings." Hazel looked up at him, her eyes soft in the porch light. "Like a stubborn calf who wouldn't nurse. Like a woman who showed up with nothing but a duffel bag and saved everything," Reed corrected. He shifted on the swing, turning to face her. Hazel Quinn, I can't promise life will always be easy. Farming never is. But I can promise to love you every day, to build something lasting with you, to make a home with you right here. He opened the small box, revealing a simple ring with a single diamond. Will you marry me? Hazel's hands flew to her mouth, tears springing to her eyes. For a moment she couldn't speak, overwhelmed by emotion. Then, with a smile that lit up her entire face, she nodded. Yes, I will. Reed slipped the ring onto her finger, then pulled her close for a kiss that was both a promise and a celebration. From the barn came the sound of Lucky's distinctive moo, as if the young bull was offering his own approval. Reed laughed, breaking the kiss. Even he knows this is right. He always did, Hazel said softly. From that very first night, as they sat together on the swing planning their future, snow continued to fall, covering Maple Ridge Farm in a blanket of white, a clean slate, a fresh beginning. Inside the warmth of the old farmhouse, on the mantel, above the fireplace stood a framed photo of Jason Callan, smiling next to a younger Reed. Beside it now sat the trophy from Lucky's competition, a symbol of everything they had overcome and all they had yet to build. Spring would come, bringing new calves, fresh growth, and endless possibilities. But for now, in the quiet of a winter evening, it was enough to be together, the farmer who had almost lost everything and the woman who had chosen to stay. For Hazel Quinn and Reed Callan, broken things had indeed grown into something beautiful. They had found in each other the one thing everyone searches for, a love worth fighting for, a love worth staying for, and Lucky, the calf who had brought them together, would always remind them that sometimes the things that seem most fragile turn out to be the strongest of all. The end.